Hey, we're live. Welcome to the Grayzone, everybody. It's Max Blumenthal. It's been a little while since we did a live stream. I thought we should get one in before the end of the year and just have some banter with everyone in the chat and with my colleague Aaron Mate, who's here. What's up, Aaron?
What's going on? Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Good to get one last stream in for the end of the year. So thanks, everybody, for tuning in.
Yeah. So I don't know. I thought we'd talk about some of I can't really remember what happened this year except some kind of bad stuff that Putin did. But whatever big stories we can remember, we're going to talk about. We might have some special guest appearances by the authors of those stories. And yeah, I don't want to ruin any surprises. So we'll just kind of keep it rolling.
The way I think about this year, I was just thinking about this today. The way I think about this year is in terms of the space we occupy in media and in the political space. In some ways, it really shrunk, right? In the sense that, for example, Russia invaded Ukraine, and then all of a sudden it became even harder than before to offer a dissenting voice, a voice that offers criticism of the policies of the US-led NATO order and all the things they do around the world. It got even harder. But at the same time, it expanded too, because I think many people, no matter how they identify in the political spectrum, whether left or right, they got increasingly disgusted with corporate media and just the slavish devotion to the proxy war narrative and refusal to allow on countervailing voices. And so I think we also, even if we lost some more friends this year and things got harder in the lefty media space, as it's known, to discuss these issues, I still think we reached a whole new segment of people who are just turned off by what's going on and by the narrative that they're getting. And so that's how I kind of look back on this year in terms of like the space we occupied.
Yeah, I think Syria was a big education for everyone. And if you understand the Syrian dirty war and all the deceptions that were deployed, then you can understand what's happening in Ukraine. Well, not necessarily what's happening in Ukraine, but the gigantic psyop that's being imposed on the Western world to cultivate support, especially among the liberal and left-wing public, for this deranged war and everything that precipitated it, and especially the white helmets. I mean, if you understand what was behind the Syrian white helmets, then it's so easy to see through all of the ruses and artifice being deployed by Zelensky and the scores of public relations firms that surround him. So when we started puncturing all those myths around the white helmets, and there were other journalists who were doing it before us, there's no doubt about that. But when we started doing it, I'm just talking about how it affected us. I was the target of insane attacks. And I really think that it does feel different this year. It does feel like there at least is a larger community that cuts, across the political spectrum, that understands that there is a deeper context to this war, that it isn't just some unprovoked invasion by a psychopath, that there were events that precipitated it, and that people are being actively deceived. And what's really wild about 2022 is just to see in Congress and in mainstream corporate media the critique of the war as a gigantic deception and money laundering operation, as a proxy war itself, is largely on the right, on the MAGA right. And, we come from the left, and we've been throughout this year since February, really, I think, carrying the banner in like alternative left independent media. I don't necessarily know what left means, and we can get into that later.
Yeah.
But, it's been a very, as you said, Aaron, it's been a really lonely space to occupy.
Well, you got a taste of it when you confronted Ro Khanna earlier this year on Capitol Hill and asked him about, for example, how he went from leading the way in banning U.S. assistance to the Azov battalion to now voting every single time to fund the weapons that are going to the Azov battalion, the neo-Nazi Azov battalion. And what did he do? He accused you of basically parroting Russian talking points and suggested you work for RT or something like that.
Well,
we are progressive in Congress.
Yeah, after and we saw AOC do the same thing, as well as Ilhan Omar. It became kind of a squad progressive talking point that
Yeah.
anyone who dared to challenge them in public over their support, first for the 40 billion, which is coming straight back here to weapons manufacturers, that anyone who did that was at least a Putin puppet, if not a Russian agent. And the funniest thing about Ro Khanna, of course, is that he's the guy who, at least his staffers, like the people who were running his foreign policy back in 2018, he signed off on the ban on weapons to the Azov battalion, which finally went through in 2018. And he not only denounced the Azov battalion in a tweet, he called out the Orange Revolution back in 2005 as basically a sham.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
then we saw the real Ro Khanna when I caught him. I doorstepped him outside the U.S. Capitol. Well, it's not just the Democrats. It's not just progressives who are cheerleading for this insane proxy war. It's also, there's a uniparty. And I think it's become more and more clear to people this year that we're governed by a uniparty, and that partisan distinctions matter less and less, especially with respect to foreign policy. And one of the figures I'd identify with the uniparty is Sean Hannity. I mean, he's sort of like the anti-Tucker Carlson on Fox. He's really carrying the banner for the war party on Fox News. And here's a really remarkable clip I wanted to play that took place. I guess this is like a Sean Hannity like a fill-in, like a guest host.
This is Jason Chaffetz. Is that his name? He's a former
he
Congress member from Utah. I think he was filling in for Hannity.
He's kind of a corporate Republican, neocon on foreign policy, Club for Growth, kind of just wants to cut taxes and give money to the rich and corporations, and that's it. So he has Iran-Contra felon Ali North on, who should have been probably convicted of like 60 counts during Iran-Contra. But anyway, Ali, this is another mask-off moment.
Is that money well spent? The president's assuring us that he's going to deal with it responsibly, but $110 billion, American people aren't seeing that kind of money. It's coming out of their pockets.
Well, it's coming out of all of our pockets, but it's money well spent. In my humble opinion, and this is very much like what Ronald Reagan did back in the 80s, and I do have some experience with that. I know that makes me a lot older than most of our viewers, but in fact, he believed in supporting freedom fighters. He did it in Latin America. He did it in Angola, Guinea-Bissau, Mozambique. He did it in Afghanistan. Those people were willing, as the Ukrainian people are, to use their blood and our bullets. And by the way,
let's hear that again.
Did it in Afghanistan. Those people were willing, as the Ukrainian people are, to use their blood and our bullets. And by the way, most of that 110 billion total between the 45, the 1.7, and the previous 65, over 110 billion, is spent here in the United States. It's provided to contractors and defense logisticians and the kinds of people who build the kinds of systems that we're getting. So most of that money is spent here in America. Good, hardworking Americans have the jobs. And when you look at that kind of an investment, what would be the difference if, when the giant does awake, and that's all about communist China. It's just not a plug for this book. The idea of it is to make sure that they get the right message and to make sure that Putin gets the right message. No more invasions. And that means the people in Taiwan are going to need the same kinds of weapon systems that we're now providing to the Ukrainians.
Is that money well spent?
So amazing.
Their blood, our bullets. Couldn't describe the proxy war any better. But then he goes on and says what this is really about. He talks about how the windfall this is causing for the U.S. military-industrial complex, what a great thing that is. And he also says this is not even really about Ukraine. It's about China. We have to send a message to China, to communist China, in his words. And, what I love about what he says there is he says, this is a lot like what Ronald Reagan was doing in the 80s. Well, I hope, and going back to, how we started this, the progressives who are in lockstep with funding this proxy war, especially Bernie Sanders, who back in the 80s was opposing what Ronald Reagan was doing in Central America. Bernie actually was principled back then and did some important work opposing the dirty wars in Central America. I hope Bernie Sanders can hear one of the figureheads of those dirty wars bragging about how Ukraine is a replay of what Ronald Reagan did back then and what Bernie Sanders was then opposing, but now in Ukraine is now supporting.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we see the same kind of. Well, let's go back to another comment by Ollie North that the money is coming back here, so this is a good investment. He's basically saying that the Ukrainian proxy war is creating jobs. That Zelensky's a job creator for Americans by killing Ukrainians, sending them headlong into Russian artillery. They're creating jobs back here. He said most of the money is coming back here. That's something that I don't think Americans understand. And if they do, and they might actually like it here in Washington. You see so many Ukrainian flags here in DC on homes, particularly in neighborhoods near the Capitol or near the Pentagon. Near the US Capitol, you'll see Ukrainian flags on expensive multi-million-dollar townhomes next to Black Lives Matter flags, or home hand-drawn. They used to have like hand-drawn RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, like were notorious RBG signs on their lawns, and then it became a Ukrainian flag. That's where the liberals are. Then you go across the river to Virginia, near the Pentagon, where all the contractors live. You have a Ukrainian flag next to an American flag. For the liberals, the Ukrainian flag is like a proxy nationalism, because the American flag for them was ruined by MAGA and Trump. And across the river, they're down with what Ollie North said. Give us jobs, give us the money, and it's your blood and our bullets. So this is indeed a money laundering operation, just as Afghanistan was. And the American people are actually not benefiting from it unless they actually serve that cadre of people around Washington and in the defense sector. That's disgusting. And that's really what our economy is. So it's an economy of death. I mean, just go take a trip from to Dulles National Airport out in Virginia to Washington, D.C., and just look out the right side of your car. Look out the right window. You'll see it's the corridor of death. It's like Times Square, but for death merchants. Every arms company that's profiting from this is on that corridor. And that's what this war is about, as Ollie North said. So I thought that was an incredible clip. And here's another one you wanted to.
Let me say quick. He's also endorsing, in principle, he's endorsing the idea of state socialism. He likes the idea of government spending, creating jobs at home. When someone like Bernie Sanders proposes that in a New Deal type of framework, like government jobs that aren't premised on making war machines and killing people, he gets decried as a socialist. And Oliver North claims to love the free market, but he's totally fine with using government money to create jobs at home if it's fueling hegemonic aims and sacrificing Ukrainians, especially, in the process.
Yeah, at the very least, he's down with military Keynesianism. No offense to Keynes. I mean, whether you agree with him or not, it's not exactly what he imagined how he imagined the economy. Although the post-war U.S. economy has always been about military Keynesianism.
Yeah.
Zelensky is Churchill. Don't you agree? His address was Churchillian. That's what we're going to hear now.
Politicians and the press often toss around comparisons to Winston Churchill, but this time, minus the cigar and the whiskey, it fits.
President Biden face to face with the man who has drawn comparisons to Winston Churchill.
And in a dramatic wartime appearance, reminiscent of Winston Churchill in World War II.
This was historic. Some people have compared it to when Churchill came.
Zelensky is very much acting in the Churchillian tradition.
What could be a Churchillian moment? I mean, he is a modern Winston Churchill with an iPhone.
Someone who probably is the most courageous and inspirational leader since Winston Churchill.
Where Winston Churchill stood generations ago, so too President Zelensky stands.
So you're almost saying that Zelensky's had a harder job than Churchill had.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
This is a historical figure. This guy actually can be compared to Winston Churchill, to Lincoln in 1860.
Well, I don't even know if any of them know anything about Churchill, but that was kind of the talking point ahead of his speech. He's fighting Hitler, I guess. Everything's about Hitler now. Putin is clearly Hitler, but he wants to restore the Soviet Union.
Yes, and we have to fight the new Hitler by arming neo-Nazis. People who openly brandish, swastikas and swastika-inspired insignia, like the Azov Battalion. Somehow arming them means we're fighting Hitler. And my favorite line in that compilation was he's Churchill with an iPhone, really trying to hammer home the point that, you know, we're in the modern era. But that whole display was so sad for many reasons, including, you know, but like behind all the triumphalism and jingoism, Zelensky didn't even come away with what he wanted. They had a whole wish list of weapon systems they want to get from the U.S. And I think there was like 5 main ones, and he only got one, which is the Patriot missile system, and of which he got 1 battery, which won't even be deployed until spring. So while we're hailing this guy as the new Churchill, and we're saying he's fighting Hitler, we're denying him all of his top demands on his weapons wish list that he says he needs to defeat the new Hitler. And the one thing we're giving him is a single Patriot battery. And there's questions even about the effectiveness of the Patriot missile system. But regardless, it won't even be deployed until spring. And why is that? So why are we denying the weapon systems that the new Churchill wants? It's because they want to keep this fight inside Ukraine. If they give them more, the U.S. fears that's going to draw them in, and they don't want to fight Russia directly. So they're fine to continue sacrificing Ukrainians if it continues the aim, as expressed by Lloyd Austin, of weakening Russia. So the aim here is not even to defend Ukraine. It's just to bleed Russia for as long as possible. And I guess they see a new opportunity, hence why Zelensky was brought in and everyone pretended that he was the new Churchill.
Well, if you think about Churchill or Zelensky and Churchill, the comparison in light of the way that Russians are portrayed as savages, or ethnic Russians in Eastern Ukraine portrayed as savages in US media, then Churchill's colonial era statement that I favor using poison gas against uncivilized tribes does kind of fit Zelensky and what he's doing in Donetsk and Lugansk, basically bombing civilians, relentlessly dumping petrol mines in civilian areas. There's also been allegations of some, phosphorus and other weapons being used. And they have been attacking territory that Russia considers parts of the Russian Federation and provoking escalation. The attack on the Kerch Bridge, which we'll talk about a little bit later, was kind of a fulcrum point in this war. And it's what triggered the escalation from the Russian side to start attacking Ukraine's electrical grid, which has really increased in recent days. Arestovich, one of Zelensky's key advisors, was unable to do his nightly live stream. He's one of the biggest media figures in Ukraine because his electricity was out. So imagine if they got long-range weapons that could hit further than Belgorod or somewhere close to Ukraine. I mean, Moscow isn't actually that far by, US standards. Imagine if they had something that could strike as far as the Russian Iskander missile, what this would lead to. I think we'd be coming close to seeing tactical nuclear weapons deployed in response. And that's what Zelensky, as you pointed out, Aaron, came to Washington to ask for. I was outside the U.S. Capitol. I went out there the same way I went in March to challenge lawmakers and try to doorstep them outside the Capitol. And that's when I, got to confront Ro Khanna on his support for the war and other figures. Maria Elvira Salazar, the right-wing Cuban legislator from Florida who called for a no-fly zone over Ukraine. I mean, these people were absolute idiots. But I thought, maybe I'm going to get some of the same kind of idiocy, but about the 45 billion, more than 45 billion that Zelensky had come to ask for when he arrived in Washington. And nobody was out. The Capitol was totally locked down. There were cops everywhere, barricades. It was like January 6th, but the walls were a little bit lower. One figure I found outside was Joe Manchin. He got lost and he seemed really loopy, and he was actually trying to lift up a metal barricade to let himself in. And I, confronted him. I guess I didn't have the right follow-up question, but I said, do you even know how many billions we've sent? And he said, we're going to send a lot more and I'm all in. And then he held up a cell phone to try to kind of freeze me out until he ducked behind a Capitol police officer and rushed into the Capitol. But, his donors in the energy industry are doing very well as a result of this and the explosion of the Nord Stream pipeline. So that was very indicative encounter I had with one of them, but I did manage to, this is a really weird incident. I didn't have anyone to interview, so I was just kind of hanging around a small anti-war demonstration on the east side of the Capitol. And it really showed where the anti-war movement was today. It was like a very small group of people, with maybe 2 people who were under the age of 40. And many of the speakers felt like they had this obligation to first denounce Russia before they could say anything about the war. It was weird and sad, but, you know, props to everyone who came out, all about 15 people. I was standing around, and all of a sudden this giant delegation rolls up of Ukrainians, and they ask one of the anti-war activists to take a picture of them. So instead of, you know, confronting them over being like this giant force behind the war, they get a nice picture in front of the Capitol from an anti-war demonstrator. And I happened to roll up, and I decided that I would start like peppering them with some real critical questions. So I'll show you a part of that exchange, but listen carefully to what a woman says at the beginning of this encounter, because it really speaks to the mentality of Zelensky and the people behind him. So she said, nope, nope.
Max, we're not seeing the clip if you're playing it. You're sharing, it looks like you're sharing the wrong screen.
Yeah, I am sharing the wrong screen. My bad.
While you find it, let me just say a piece about the, you know, the bombing of the infrastructure, which
well,
Russia
here it is, Aaron. Let me just get
okay.
through it.
Okay. Yeah.
Is 45 billion not enough? Nope. Not enough? How much more should we give to Ukraine instead of our own people? Do you support the Azov battalion?
Okay. There is no more of an Azov battalion.
There's no more
All
Azov?
The battalions were trained and recruited back into a formal professional army over the last 8 years.
So the neo-Nazis were brought into the army?
No, there are no neo-Nazis in the army.
Do you support Stepan Bandera?
Stepan Bandera died a long time ago.
War against innocent people.
I oppose the assault on Donetsk. Do you? The shelling of the people of Donetsk, do you oppose that?
You know?
No?
Are you kidding?
Why are civilians being killed in Donetsk and Lugansk? Do you oppose that? Should the U.S. send $1 trillion of our taxpayer money to Ukraine? $1 trillion?
This is the least expensive
What about $2
method of
trillion?
ensuring democracy globally.
$1 trillion? Is there any limit?
There's no. It's not close to $1 trillion.
If Ukraine is a democracy, why did Zelensky ban all opposition media and 13 political parties? No, I'm not. I'm not paid by Moscow. Are you paid by the Ukrainian government that's banned all opposition media?
No, I'm American.
You don't believe there is a Ukrainian government kill list maintained by the Interior Ministry?
No.
It's a lie.
It's a lie.
Just like the non-existent neo-Nazis.
Lies.
Lies.
Lies. You're filled with lies.
Write them email. They really answer all the time. Write them email.
So no answer about if Ukraine is a democracy, why did Zelensky ban 13 opposition parties?
Martial law.
It's martial law, okay. Sounds undemocratic. Why did he ban the Russian wing of the Orthodox Church?
The Russian Orthodox Church was serving as a treasonous organization and was found with materials that were illegal and financing the enemy.
So banning clergy, banning media, banning opposition. This is fighting for democracy.
You are serving Putin.
But you acknowledged it was all true. I'm serving Putin by stating facts.
You're not stating facts.
You just acknowledged that it was martial law and it was facts.
No, all I said is it's martial law. I didn't acknowledge it's a fact.
So he didn't ban the Russian wing of the Orthodox Church.
No, he hasn't. He's submitted legislation for certain.
So yeah, very, I mean, these were very significant figures, but yeah, Aaron,
I believe one of them was involved in the privatization of Puerto Rico, right?
Yeah, that's the woman who you hear doing most of the talking.
Yeah.
Is Natalie Jaresko. And she was the head of what they call in Puerto Rico, La Junta, which is the Promesa board imposed by the U.S. to basically take Puerto Rico's debt, which exploded after Hurricane Maria, and put it in the hands of Wall Street creditors. And where did she get her experience? She got her experience after the Maidan coup as the finance minister of Ukraine. And her job was just to negotiate with creditors over Ukraine's debt and ram through as many austerity packages as possible. I mean, it saw the average Ukrainian living off like $150 a month. All of their public assets were looted after 2014. And that was the point. I mean, that was really the point. And then you saw that a man getting really upset with me when I brought up the shelling of Donetsk, which has been going on for 9 years now. His name is Orest Deshusky, and he is a sitting member of the U.S. Commission on European European cooperation, the OECD, European Cooperation and Development.
OECD, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, essentially, they're monitoring violations in Ukraine. He's supposed to be monitoring violations. He oversees like election systems, but the OECD also was monitoring violations of the Minsk Accords. And this is a guy who says he's not against shelling people in Donetsk and in the ethnic Russian side of the Donbass. So he's in favor of violating the Minsk Accords, but he's a sitting member of this U.S. commission. It's amazing.
Yeah. You know, and the fact that you raised the issue of Donetsk and Luhansk with him, again, these Ukrainian areas that rose up in 2014 after a U.S.-backed coup, it raises a point I was thinking about today. When I look at the state of like a critical debate inside lefty progressive media in the U.S. when it comes to the proxy war in Ukraine, the topic you're allowed to acknowledge, like people like Matt Duss, the former Bernie Sanders aide, they'll acknowledge that NATO expansion. They'll say NATO expansion, yeah, we should maybe question that. That's the only topic that's on the table. You're not allowed to discuss the 2014 coup and the ensuing 8-year war that the U.S. played a major role in fueling, and the Minsk Accords that were sabotaged, as Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, recently acknowledged. Merkel gave an interview where she said that the aim of the Minsk Accords was to give Ukraine time, not to make peace with the rebels, but to give Ukraine time. And that's what Ukraine did, because Ukraine built up its military, and now she says they're able to fight. Now, some people say that Merkel was just saying that to placate hawkish voices inside Germany who accuse her of being too soft on Russia. But regardless, it speaks to how untrustworthy the NATO states are in Russia's eyes, and openly saying that their peace agreements aren't worth anything and were intended just as a stalling tactic. And you can't talk about that in progressive media. You can't talk anymore about the coup in 2014. You can't talk about the war in the Donbass. You can't really talk about the fact the U.S. has missiles placed in Poland and Romania that can be aimed at Russia, and that is a major source of concern, and are there because the U.S. has killed arms control treaties. And the reason why I think you can't talk about them, well, I don't know the exact reason, but one of the reasons is this. NATO expansion has been opposed by some people inside the establishment. So like, eminent statesmen like George Kennan back in the 90s warned that this would be a big mistake. William Perry, the former defense secretary, almost resigned over it. So if someone from the establishment says an issue is kosher, blesses the issue, then that means that lefty people who take their cues from that, they're allowed to discuss it. But anything else, especially if it involves something covert, like we don't know for sure yet the full extent of the U.S. role in the 2014 coup, and we probably won't for many decades. But we do know at least that Victoria Nuland was involved in secretly plotting on who to install as the next Ukrainian leader, as evidenced by that leaked phone call that everyone's heard. So, but because it's covert, because it's run through groups like the National Endowment for Democracy, that's off the table. You're not allowed to question, these covert operations that are right in front of our faces. You only can talk about issues that have been acknowledged as issues by people already inside the mainstream establishment.
Yeah. And it's about controlling reality for them, because any attempt to provide context that complicates their view of history disrupts their control over reality. And the regime, which spans from liberal to Sean Hannity, at least on the core issues of U.S. empire, their ideology just boils down to reality, that they control reality and everyone else is a conspiracy theorist. They don't really believe in anything. They don't really have an ideology other than that. That's why I think their control over Wikipedia is such an important device, and why they invest so much into social media censorship. We have,
by the way, and Max, you saw this with the Twitter files, where I think this is my favorite part of the whole Twitter files episode, where after the disclosures came out about the FBI, in close contact with Twitter and passing on warnings that led to the suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop story, the FBI released a statement calling the journalists who've been involved in that story conspiracy theorists.
Yeah.
for reporting.
Yeah, that was an amazing statement.
Facts.
They didn't deny anything. They just said conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a catch-all term to discredit anything counter hegemonic.
Yes.
We got Kit Clarenberg in the green room. We wanted to talk about some of our big stories this year, but I wanted to talk about Whiskey-gate with Colonel Andrew Milburn, Andy Milburn. Kit, do you want to raise your hand if you want to chop it up with us for that segment? All right. Welcome, Kit.
How's it going?
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
We got an echo. I don't know if you can do anything about that.
Yeah, Kit, try turning down your volume a little bit.
Yeah, if you just
try now.
You have like a Bluetooth. It's like one of those old like early 2000 era Bluetooth things that like used car dealers wear.
Did that even exist then?
I don't know.
Just keep going. Keep trying.
All right, we're good. Anyway, me and Kit, we have, Aaron, have you ever met Kit in person?
In person, no.
So we're hoping to meet you in person someday, but you've been really a presence at the Grayzone this year. And before we get into some of the stories, do a little retrospective. Yeah, I wanted to revisit Whiskey-gate. This is a new scandal I helped expose with one of the top mercenaries in the Ukrainian theater. His name is Colonel Andy Milburn. And he was recently on this military groupie podcast called Team House, and he got wasted. It's like one of these 3-hour events where they pour out whiskey, like craft whiskey. They've got Lafroyac there, and they've got some other whiskeys in the corner you can see. And Milburn,
why don't we do this, Max? Why don't we have these whiskey events?
Because even us, such unconsequential figures, compared to someone who's training like hardcore killers on the Ukrainian battlefield and is in the middle of a potentially nuclear conflict, even us, I'm not gonna. I actually care about being precise and accurate in what I say. This guy's certainly accurate, but he really doesn't seem to care about his future. Just take a listen.
Kit, put yourself on mute.
Society, so I'm not a big fan of Ukraine. Oh, what is that?
This is Buffalo Trace.
Okay.
Whatever. It's not like he's going to refuse it.
And the Ukrainians are in violation of the Hague Convention. There is I forget the exact phraseology, but it is, we looked at this closely, and it's they should be no filming of the phrase, the terminology is bringing attention, blah 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 blah, to media, and yes, the Ukrainians are violating that. Absolutely.
Wow.
They're filming of a number of things that they're doing with POWs is violating law of armed conflict, and he can't, guys,
right?
Killing the Russian prisoners is
right. And it's interesting because in the past, in you like Latin America or whatever, if U.S. Forces or employees were involved with any force that committed, war atrocities or whatever,
back, right?
You have to, you're done.
Yeah.
But we're obviously not going to pull our support from Ukraine at this point. These violations.
It's atrocities. No, I mean, it still is. I mean, you shouldn't kill dudes who, everyone knows who surrendered. And there was plenty of that. But my point is, it's not about Ukraine. We're not like, I happen to have, Ukraine flag tied to my bag, but I'm not, oh my God, Ukraine's so awesome. No, because I understand that there are plenty fucked up people running Ukraine. It's not about that. It's about global norms, right?
Right.
It's about Putin. It's like allowing dudes in the 21st century like Putin to do what they want to do.
So it's about dudes. It's about not allowing dudes like Putin to do what they want to do. It's like, if dudes like us, we can do what we want to do. And the Ukrainians, they're committing atrocities on camera, but we can't cut them off because they're our partners. But there's one more clip I wanted to play of Andy Milburn that I think is amazing. It really highlights the mentality of the people who are profiting from this war, but who also have been getting a lot of softball coverage from U.S. media.
Are you concerned about weapons getting into the wrong hands?
I don't care at all whether that happens. Of course it's going to happen. It happens in any, I mean, if you don't have guys here supervising the pipeline, but that's not my biggest concern. My biggest concern right now is that the guys who need to kill Russians with those weapons get those weapons.
Are you concerned about weapons getting into the wrong hands?
I don't care at all whether that happens. Of course.
I don't care at all. But if the wrong hands are the Azov battalion, then yeah, let's give them the weapons. So I thought that was incredible. Andy Milburn, I don't know if he's going to be let back in Ukraine after he said that.
Yeah, he's calling it a fucked up country led by fucked up people. It's probably not going to win him too many friends.
So
at the top of then, I mean, he's been involved in actual battlefield operations, right? Not just training, but I think even participating in some battlefield situations. So
he led soldiers into battle. That's correct.
Yeah. So he's a pretty interesting source, and some great names for this emerged from Twitter. Someone called it whiskey leaks, which I thought was pretty funny. And but wasn't there somebody from PBS or something who complained to you about how you put that clip together?
Oh yeah, let me try to pull that up real quick.
I love this. Like, this is a journalist or someone or at least who works in the journalism field.
Jack Hewson.
Okay, yeah, and he was upset with you for posting this clip.
Yeah, what a jerk. Jack Hewson is a PBS correspondent who's really upset. He was upset with this leaking out to the public. So he says you might want to watch the actual podcast rather than Max's hatchet job edit. And I did link to the entire YouTube podcast, 3 hours of it, so anyone can see. There's a lot more there that I just couldn't fit into 2 minutes and 20 seconds. I haven't paid for Elon Musk's Twitter Blue to get more time, but there was more I wanted to jam in there. I don't think it was a hatchet job, but you can judge for yourself. But the hilarious thing is, let me just go to this guy's profile. So at the top of his profile, you can see his pinned tweet is honored to see PBS NewsHour nominated by Columbia Journalism DuPont Awards, named for the DuPont family that were Nazi collaborators that helped fuel Hitler's war machine and produce tons of toxic chemicals that are still being cleaned up across the U.S. The DuPont Awards for its ongoing news coverage of the war in Ukraine. And then he, lists what is this? Some photojournalist hack, some Ukrainian guy, and a risk management solutions company. So basically a Beltway contractor worked with him. And so this is who he is. And he feels so threatened by the whiskey leaks that he summons himself to defend Colonel Andy Milburn rather than have PBS report these stunning revelations from someone who fought on the front lines.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's why people hate mainstream media. I mean, this guy got ratioed pretty hard. He got 3 retweets, but he's just getting hammered.
Yeah. Well, that
Kit,
that was a pretty stunning admission, and but this guy's a record of being candid. I mean, like he says in the other clip, I don't care where the weapons are going. So we're getting here the honest truth, and the honest truth is ugly, and it's amazing how much we've been kept from it. The media just won't tell us stuff like this about Ukrainian forces committing war crimes. And of course, we can't know also about peace talks that actually get somewhere, like the peace talks back in March and April between Ukraine and Russia that apparently reached some kind of tentative deal, which was then sabotaged by Boris Johnson, presumably with U.S. backing. Still,
huge story.
Can't hear about that in the U.S.
Huge story. And actually, we saw Novara Media publish a piece on how it actually was wrong to consider it an accurate story, even though it was reported by Pravda Ukraine. So progressive media was pushing back there. But Kit, I want to welcome you into the discussion. I know you have limited time. You live in a more interesting place than I do. Things to do. What maybe you can contextualize what you heard from Andy Milburn in light of your reporting.
Yeah,
us.
sure. I mean, I think it's important to bear in mind that, like, for all of the very bizarre mainstream pushback against you, it's not just Milburn that's made these statements. Like, there are videos all over Telegram and even YouTube of foreign mercs who fought in Ukraine who can testify to the absolutely gross corruption, really shocking crimes against humanity routinely committed by Ukrainian forces. And also, like, I mean, yeah, there's a seeming contempt among a lot of these mercs for the Ukrainian people. I watched one interview the other day where this I think he was Australian, was going on at length about how, you know, stealing is part of Ukrainian culture, and like they just like kind of have it wired into their DNA to, like, you know, defraud and you know, like thieve from people, which is, you know, I mean, pretty disgusting, really. But I'm sure it is an accurate portrayal of the realities on the front line, which is, you know, not what you're being told in the Western media. But yeah, I mean, I mean, in the context of our reporting, I mean, I think that, I mean, this year it's been, you know, we have published a pretty much relentless string of exposés which challenge mainstream, you know, media dogma around, you know, very sensitive issues, and we've also exposed some of the individuals involved in pushing, you know, like this fantasy narrative about the war in Ukraine and what's at stake and why it's being fought. You know, probably most viscerally by exposing Paul Mason, that kind of long-time quote unquote left journalist, as a British intelligence asset. I mean, I think that's you know, a scoop that most journalists would get once in a career, but you know, in Grayzone you can read the stuff every week, if not pretty much daily. So yes, our friend Paul, who first came after Grayzone, and indeed you, Max, and you, Aaron, personally, and then it turned out that, you know, at the same time he was plotting along with Amil Khan, another veteran British psyops professional who had been a previous target of some of our exposés, to what was the exact phrasing? Cripple us financially, deplatform,
relentless deplatforming, and
yeah, I mean, we'll see how that worked out for them. But like, yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are other conversations of that character and ilk being conducted all the time about us. And yes, and so that was a fairly explosive string of stories over the summer, and more recently.
Well, just really quickly, I mean that story was incredible because we actually managed to expose them as they were plotting against us and trying to enlist Bellingcat and a British state security operative, Andy Price, in a anti-Grayzone kind of cabal to take us down. So we were exposing them, and you were exposing them in real time, Kid. It's something I always dreamed of doing because I knew that these plots were manifesting and unraveling or mobilizing against us, but I couldn't actually prove that they were taking place with emails. And so that for me was just, it was so vindicating, but it also was really therapeutic to be able to prove that this was what they were doing.
Oh yes, absolutely. But I mean, I think, I mean, in many ways, the gloves are off in terms of outright censorship. Since since the war in Ukraine started, I mean, it's similar to the pandemic, and I noted this on Twitter the other day. We took a lead in exposing how the pandemic was being exploited for the purposes of surveillance and social control. We were relentlessly hammered as anti-vaxxers and like COVID denying lunatics. When we're not at all, and and now the mainstream media is playing catch up. I suspect the same thing's going to happen with Ukraine now. A lot of narratives seem to be biting the dust, or like running out of steam, because by all accounts, Bakhmut, the battle for Bakhmut, which is ongoing, has been absolute carnage. And this is cropping up in pro-Ukrainian Telegram accounts that usually downplay or simply deny Ukrainian failure, and it's even being reflected by mainstream journalists that this is just like an absolute meat grinder, and there are scores of Ukrainian conscripts getting slaughtered every day, which is very contrary to the narrative of like Ukrainian heroism and success.
Zelensky, in his address to Congress, referred to Bakhmut as a new battle, a battle of Saratoga, referring to the revolutionary battle that turned the tide against the British. And if you read U.S. media about Bakhmut, this town or city in Donbass, if you read any US media about it, you would hear that it was inconsequential. It was not a strategic city, and they could not understand why the Wagner Group and the Russians were fighting so hard for it. And that felt to me like coping. And now we hear from Zelensky that this is the key battle. And we're looking at Ukrainian forces digging trenches in the middle of town. And they seem to be on the defensive. Basically, Zelensky is saying, if you don't give us the weapons we need, including, I think they're lobbying for cluster munitions now. If you don't give that to us, we're toast.
Well, yes, I mean, I think that, I mean, this also feeds into, you know, some of our other exposés towards the end of the year, in terms of the role played by senior British intelligence operatives in planning, you know, incendiary acts like the destruction of Kerch Bridge, and also in building a secret partisan terror army on behalf of the Odessa branch of the Ukrainian security service. I mean, this is stories that you can read nowhere else and have been picked up nowhere in the English language media. The same is not so much the case for media overseas. But yeah, I mean, I very much get the sense that there is a kind of paradigm shift afoot in the corridors of power in Washington and Whitehall, despite the recent visit to Washington by Zelensky with that very bizarre slow motion video where he's like kind of walking alongside Biden. This is very odd. I was kind of expecting the building behind him to explode the whole time in action movie style. But yeah, I mean, it seems very clear based on our reporting and indeed our reporting to come. So stay tuned, people. That Britain has played a pivotal, if not the central role in stirring this up, escalating. Our friend Chris Donnelly, the founder of Integrity Initiative, a long-time British military intelligence official, in private emails was slamming the quote-unquote caution of the Biden administration and saying this needs to be fought, at all costs. And then fast forward to the start of this month, and it was revealed that Britain's third prime minister in almost as many months had said that he wanted a full audit of the progress of the war in Ukraine so far. And this led to mainstream reporting in Britain, where officials admitted, nameless officials, of course, admitted that in private, we've been pushing the US and challenging Biden's caution. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, the British clearly have, a high degree of interest in various regards in keeping this going. Whether they'll be allowed to or not, it isn't clear. And yes, there does seem to be a kind of a wider shift by the mainstream media that, major outlets, which once on the basis of zero evidence, and indeed, the basis it didn't make any sense, claimed that Russia was responsible for the Nord Stream 2 pipeline attack, and now, hedging their bets and saying, "Oh, actually, it was another culprit," and we may well never know. And it's like, well, that's what we were saying at the time when we were attacked for it.
It is amazing the lack of interest, the studious lack of interest in Nord Stream is sort of amazing to witness.
It's
isn't
only
it,
a major
Aaron?
international act of terrorism. Yeah.
If they had just had like the QAnon shaman in a scuba suit, then maybe Washington would be interested, because they're a lot more interested in a low IQ riot that took place 3 years ago and lasted about 3 hours than they are in the largest act of industrial and environmental sabotage in our lifetimes. Tells you something.
Let's talk a little bit more about Kit's scoop about the Kerch Bridge, because that was such a huge story. So the Kerch Bridge gets bombed by Ukraine. And right after that, we come out with this story exposing Kit. I mean, this was your story, exposing, based on leaked documents, that months before the Kerch Bridge got attacked by Ukraine, that British operatives drew up detailed plots, and you got the blueprints. Like they had photographs of the bridge, and they were studying they were going through the engineering involved and like what needed to be done to blow up this bridge, linking Russia to Crimea. And you got some communications as well. That was an unbelievable story. So like months before the Kerch Bridge, this major project of Russia linking it to Crimea gets attacked, you have British operatives plotting to blow it up, and you exposed that. And the response in UK media was deafening silence, just deafening silence.
Indeed, and it's like this. Bearing in mind, this got picked up in Croatia, Singapore, and Belgium.
Yeah.
It's just like it's absolutely extraordinary. I mean, I think that this was an extraordinarily rich well to draw upon, not only in terms of the blueprints, like laying out very clearly the reasons for attacking Kerch Bridge and ways to do it, but also just the psychopathy of these people. There was no consideration for civilian casualties, or indeed the very obvious consequences that would follow for Ukrainians. I mean, this was the Kerch Bridge is was a major propaganda victory for Moscow following the annexation of Crimea. It was obviously going to provoke a massive counterattack, and we've kind of been seeing that playing out ever since with the major rocket attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure. I mean, it was really quite extraordinary, and they this is a bunch of kind of old duffers. I mean, they're still deeply dangerous though, who are just living out their kind of fantasies of like fighting war against Russia, which they've wanted for for decades. Like they've been pushing for this, and they finally got it. And the Ukrainians are going to fight it for them, not them themselves. So it's a zero.
In one of the emails, right? In one of the emails, I believe it was Chris Donnelly, this UK operative. I believe he complains that Biden, in his view, is too soft on Russia, right?
Yeah, Kit mentioned that, and I mean that's amazing because it shows. And Boris Johnson has made these comments too. I mean, Chris Donnelly is advising the Ministry of Defense right now. Kit, am I correct? And he's saying Biden is too soft. There's no escalation that's enough, and we need to call Putin's bluff on nuclear weapons. So let's go to the brink of nuclear escalation.
Yeah, well, I mean, but it's just like, I mean, again, some of the language is absolutely crazy. Like, I mean, within hours of the Kerch Bridge assault, Donnelly was emailed by this very senior British Army advisor who said that he literally said that he wanted Donnelly on board as an escalation expert, which is just completely crazy. And I mean, Donnelly was probably celebrating all day the attack that took place that morning, which he'd been central to the planning of. But it's like, and he said that Biden's position, fearing this could lead to nuclear war, which is a completely reasonable and quite surprisingly sane take for the US president. He said that, what was it? He said it was so unwise that it begged belief. Like, it's just, that these people subscribe to this notion that, like, well, if you keep provoking the Russians, you keep ramping up tensions, they will back down eventually. I mean, bear in mind that I've spoken to people who knew Chris Donnelly when he was a senior NATO advisor, and he was considered batshit by quite a few of his compatriots at that time. And he subscribed to this notion. When the Soviet Union started collapsing in the late 80s and the early 90s, he subscribed to something called coiled spring theory, which was the fact that all of the Red Army forces that were being withdrawn from Europe, this was actually in order to concentrate them so they could attack the West better. Like, this is at a time when Moscow is like economically and militarily disintegrating. He thought this was all a quote unquote feint in order to lull the West into a sense of false sense of security and then strike. And it's just, I mean, despite many failed predictions, he still seems to have an enormous amount of influence. But I do think that increasingly that is hitting a growing resistance, both like in Washington, but also in London.
Kit, speaking of UK operatives, before you go, I have to ask you about Grayzone fan favorite Nina Jankowicz. If you remember her, she was one of the big stories of 2022. She was going to head Joe Biden's new disinformation governance board at the Department of Homeland Security. But then the videos of her emerged, of her, singing, a Mary Poppins song about disinformation, and all of her batshit views, including her efforts to smear the Grayzone, among many others. But now she has a new job. She's bounced back, so she didn't get the job at the DHS, but now she has a new job, right? And can you tell us about what that is and who she's working for?
Yeah, sure. So, our dear friend Scary Poppins. So, I mean, this is like an ever-evolving story, but as you mentioned, Nina Jankowicz is a former Ukrainian government propagandist who was tapped to head, has been hailed as this disinformation expert, despite a history of telling outright lies and endorsing, among other things, the Steele dossier. So she's gone after. I think she's gone after us all personally, and the Grayzone more generally at various different points. At the tail end of the summer, there was an individual called Ross Burley who was tied to this organization called the Center for Information Resilience, which is very Orwellian. It sounds like they'd come to give you a brain realignment or something against your wishes. But essentially, he called out at a was it Estonian government event.
He looks even crazier singing with the sound off. By the way, but
do you want to hear her sing for a bit?
Yeah, well, maybe I can like play it at a low volume while you detail this.
No, I think we're good on this singing.
And it's plain to see evil inside of me is on the rise.
All right, well, that was the nominee for disinformation czar of the United States Department of Homeland Security under the Biden administration. But Kit, you were talking about her involvement with this guy, Ross Burley, who we now know is Foreign Office funded. And so because Nina Jankowicz has had to register as a foreign agent in the United States in order to carry out her business with Ross Burley. That was
well, it's just like in effect, like at the tail end of the summer, like the charming Ross Burley, he libeled the Grayzone by calling us a Russian propaganda. Sorry. Like he libeled the Grayzone by calling us a Russian propaganda outfit, and I think that he was particularly angry that Russell Brand, who I mean he's just generally fantastic, had Aaron Mate, who we called Aaron Mate, this disinformation expert who can't even pronounce someone's name correctly. He openly called for YouTube to deplatform us and anyone who dare feature us on their podcast or whatever show they have. I started digging into him and I found that he was part of this Foreign Office effort, which Nina Jankowicz was once very intimately associated, called Open Information Partnership, which is basically a pan-European quote unquote troll factory. Like they admit this in internal documents, and they also admit that they one of the key struggles they face in battling Kremlin disinformation, quote unquote, is that it's often factually true. Which is similar to the label conspiracy theory should tell you quite a lot. I surmise that Burley's Center for Informational Resilience was a British intelligence cutout, and lo and behold, in Nina Jankowicz's FARA declarations, because she's now going to be lobbying on the center's behalf in Washington and trying to get it government funding and more business. It's right there in black and white. It receives an enormous amount of money from the British Foreign Office. So yes, I never get tired of being proven right, but this is confirmation that that the Grayzone is in the crosshairs of British intelligence at the highest levels.
So in short, Nina Jankowicz, the supposed czar who was going to police disinformation and protect us from foreign influence, from foreign propaganda, she is now working for a foreign state-funded propaganda operation. Is that fair to say?
Yes, indeed. And yes, as I say, like she was intimately involved in Open Information Partnership, which is funded to the tune of millions annually by the Foreign Office. And she sat on its advisory board, and it's clear too from the emails implicating Paul Mason, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spice, that she is in direct contact with his handler Andy Price as well. And this is someone who's in her early 30s and quite clearly doesn't know anything, and she's like hailed as this expert on disinformation, but then often struggles to define what disinformation is.
Here's her FARA form, by the way.
Scroll down.
Well, that's the only scrolling I can do.
There it is.
But essentially, what if we did scroll down? If there was more in this tweet that I'm showing on the screen, it would show that the Foreign Office is the sponsor of the Center for Information Resilience. Basically, another huge story that we and Kit Clarenberg exposed this year. I want to keep it moving, but Kit, you said you never get tired of being proven right. Well, that's good, because you won't enjoy any fatigue in the coming year. And I can tell everyone who's watching this and supporting the Grayzone, I have some huge Kit Clarenberg pieces just sitting on my desk or in my laptop right now. We're going to publish one right after this broadcast. So we're really, really privileged to work with you, Kit, and it's been an incredible year exposing these bastards.
Well, I mean, the feeling's more than mutual, and many more bastards are going to get vigorously exposed. I guarantee it.
All right, we got Alex Rubenstein in the back end, so in the proverbial back end in the green room. So
the dream team, the dream team.
What an introduction!
I'm gonna love you and leave you, but like, happy New Year all.
Happy New Year, Kit.
Let's kill
One
this.
day we'll meet in
Great
person.
work.
All right, Alex, good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
My fellow married Grayzone contributor.
That's right.
We're the married men caucus at the Grayzone. How's married life treating you? How was your year?
It's good. Oh no, I mean, what a year. I think this year has been a real opportunity for all of us at the Grayzone to, as Aaron was saying earlier, bring our message to a new audience, a receptive audience. I think that in a lot of ways, the left has really fallen on its face in processing this war. The very same people who, Max, you knew me in 2016 when I was following around the so-called alt-right, the neo-Nazis, and just documenting everything that they were doing. And all of these people are supporting Ukraine. I mean,
Richard Spencer.
They look at he's a big NATO guy now. They look at Ukraine as people as like Nazis who actually have their shit together, who are actually able to do something substantial rather than kill a woman in Charlottesville, which was basically their only claim to fame. So it's really sad to see how the left has kind of failed to acknowledge this issue when, for the past 6 years or however long, it's been nonstop Nazi, Nazi, Nazi. So I think this has been, like, again, a real opportunity for the Grayzone. Myself, I've particularly focused on this issue of neo-Nazis. I think the article that you and I did in just a few days after the war started was foundational to a lot of the discourse that has come since then about this Nazi issue, just really putting it into perspective for people, laying it out in terms and identifying the relationships, because I think there was this massive psyop that we honed in on very early with Volodymyr Zelensky, just kind of saying, well, how could there be a Nazi problem in the Ukrainian government or the Ukrainian armed forces when the president's Jewish? And so we very clearly identified his relationship to all these different Nazi factions within the Ukrainian government or the military sphere, whether it be C-14, which was carrying out pogroms against Roma people in collaboration with the Kiev municipal government, or the Azov battalion and these other groups. So I think it's been a really good opportunity for us, just because we've been talking about this issue since 2014, and now it's becoming something that's like not just like a fringe issue. It's really defining the era of today.
Yeah, I mean, that picture you saw, the photo below the headline of our piece, shows Zelensky giving the Hero of Ukraine Award to Dmitry Kotsubaila, who is one of the key warlords of the far right sector. I mean, they call themselves right sector. Many of them are neo-Nazis, if not ultra-nationalists. And there he is, being saluted.
And that's a guy who was bragging to reporters, this is something that you found, about feeding the bones of Russian children to his pet wolf.
Yeah, I mean, he was kind of joking, but he was joking about the stereotype of him, because that's right sectors, the ideological vanguard of the Ukrainian military. They're the ones who get the conscripts. If the conscripts aren't going to fight, they're the ones who do the fighting, and their target is ethnic Russian Ukrainians. They were involved heavily in the Odessa massacre in 2014, killing scores of ethnic Russians and their supporters after the Maidan coup, because they saw that they were being officially disenfranchised, and they were all burned alive in a union hall by right sector supporters backed by the Ukrainian SBU. So Zelensky, I mean, that's what he sits at the top of that government that relies heavily still on ultranationalist muscle. And there's still this propaganda about him being the Jewish president. He was said to celebrate Hanukkah, and I think it was Jake Tapper, or it was Joe Biden himself who said that Zelensky celebrates Hanukkah and is Jewish. How could there be Nazis during their press conference? So yeah, that piece was foundational. And Alex, you also did the following month, I think in April, you did one of your first pieces about the Georgian Legion, which is, I think, another huge story about this war that few others have covered.
Yeah, I mean, the Georgian Legion is a really significant group because so at the beginning of the war, Zelensky set up the International Legion, and that's what the Georgian Legion used to be called, because it is an international legion. It's not just Georgians; it's plenty of people, Canada, the UK, the United States. But the Georgian Legion, it's led by this warlord. He's a veteran of like 4 wars against Russia, named Mamuka Mamalashvili.
You can see him in the center of this photo with Elliot Engel, former representative and head of the House, ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, to his left. So he was welcomed in Congress.
Yeah, by I think it was like 6 members of the House and two senators. He posted photos from outside their office, Feinstein and Gillibrand. So I mean, this is a guy who's like very clearly well connected. He's got familial relations in Georgia to powerful far right people. And this has really been an outfit that's been overlooked. I was first tipped off to it because of a former volunteer with them by the name of Henry Heft. And Henry in the very beginning made headlines because they were trying to send him to the front line without a proper kit, without a rifle. And he refused to go. And, the Georgian Legion apparently threatened his life. If he fled, he had to, cross the border back into Poland to flee covertly away from, the checkpoints that were being set up. But one of the things that, one of the pieces of information that was relayed to me from him was that the Georgian Legion had executed 2 men who they accused of being spies with no evidence, no kind of trial. So a clear war crime. So after that bit of information became known to me, I started looking more into them, and I found all these relations between Mamuka and power structures in the foreign policy power structures in the United States. And they actually became a lot more relevant later on because of this information operation called NAFO, which, we've covered extensively.
Yeah.
Because NAFO was set up at first as a crowdfunding campaign for the Georgia National Legion. And again, this war crime that was relayed to me by Henry Heft was far from the only war crime that they've been accused of or caught on camera doing. There's video of them executing a captive Russian soldier, just shooting him. There's a testimony from another member about how an accused Russian spy, 18-year-old kid, was captured, and then he had his Achilles heel slit and forced to swim across the river as the Georgian Legion took practice shots at him. So, I mean, it's a very brutal group. Mamuka, the commander himself, has admitted that it's their policy not to take Russians captive. They just kill them. Sometimes they tie their hands, is what he said. But go ahead, Max.
Well, yeah, I don't know if you have I'm struggling to find the audio of Henry Heft's interview, but it's really chilling. And we did embed it in one of your reports. But just to kind of break down what Alex is saying and what the story he's been following throughout 2022 is that this blood-stained international legion, which is drawing in mercenaries, criminals wanted in the US, like Craig Lang, who looks like he murdered a couple in Florida stole their money to fund his trip to Ukraine. Paul Gray, who's a member of several or was involved with 4 neo-Nazi groups, and they're committing atrocities. Their commander boasts of the atrocities that they commit. We've seen them on camera executing captured Russian soldiers, as Colonel Andy Milburn says they do in Whiskey-Gate. And NAFO, the North Atlantic Fellows Organization, which is celebrated in US media as this great information war advancement that's turning the tables on Putin, as if Russia really has like some serious information cachet in the US media environment. They are raising money for this organization and these figures. So you can just pretty much donate money right now to some of the worst criminal class killers fighting on the Ukraine battlefield. Meanwhile, I could go to jail if I send money to the wrong charity in the Gaza Strip. There are people in jail for life for doing that. The Holy Land Foundation directors, for example. So that's why I think this reporting really upset them. And we've been, you know, the target of NAFO ever since, especially you.
Yeah, I mean, and I just,
if I can just say, Alex, you know,
ahead.
like the stories also show just how much Ukrainian politics has become increasingly dominated by the far right of the country. So you have Zelensky coming in, being elected on a mandate for peace, and who knows what his actual intentions were. I think he did take some steps initially that were somewhat in the direction of peace, whether they were sincere or not. And what happens? People like Right Sector, who you talked about, threatened to kill him. What's his name? Dmitry Yarosh says he'll hang from a tree if he makes peace with Russia. And this continues right up until...
He was even threatened by Poroshenko.
Poroshenko opposed Zelensky's peace mandate, even though Poroshenko is the president who signed the Minsk Accords, which Zelensky was claiming to be committed to. And that in the West, in the NATO states, that far right agenda has become synonymous with what the Ukrainian polity is. Those are the only Ukrainian voices we're allowed to listen to. And so your exposés, just talking about how Zelensky was, you know, bullied into making peace with the far right and awarding them with medals, and then the kinds of people that then get incorporated into the armed forces. It's so important because that's the side of Ukraine we're not allowed to hear, along with the voices for peace. So, for example, Zelensky has a close friend who was his comedy producer named Sergei Savoko. I'm probably mispronouncing his name. It's written about in Nikolai Petro's new book, The Tragedy of Ukraine, which I just did an interview with Petro about on Pushback. Sergei Savoko was appointed by Zelensky to lead this like reconciliation and dialogue commission to help, you know, have dialogue between the Donbass and the rest of Ukraine. And when he unveiled his mandate, his campaign for dialogue, members of the Azov battalion sabotaged his speech. They attacked him as he couldn't even finish his speech. And then Zelensky fired him a couple of weeks later. And that's a reflection of the winds of the politics in Ukraine. But people like that stories like that get ignored because we're taking the side of the far right. That is who the U.S. is behind firmly inside Ukraine. And so the kind of reporting you've done in exposing what that far right really means, how they operate, the atrocities they commit, is so important because we can't hear about what they actually do in establishment media because they're our biggest allies.
Yeah, I mean, just a few weeks into Zelensky's presidency, members of his cabinet were caught at a neo-Nazi concert.
Right.
You look at Craig Lang, who was a member of the Georgian Legion. He's a national hero. I mean, I don't think he's been given any official awards, but he is looked at as a hero in Ukraine. This is a guy who the FBI has video evidence of him drowning a woman. They injected the woman with adrenaline and then drowned her. They injected her so that she wouldn't pass out. I mean, that's the kind of like sick people that have been drawn to this conflict for the past 8 years. I mean, so really, I think what we've done is expose Ukraine. At least what I've done is try to expose Ukraine as,
I think
as well. I mean, there have been other things that have been exposed, but in particular, I think what I've done is shown it as kind of a place for pilgrimage for the international neo-Nazi movement, for people to go and get the kind of training and be around once again the organizations, the neo-Nazi organizations that they see as having success. And one thing I noted in my piece on the ADL recently is how they said it themselves that the international neo-Nazi movement sees the Azov Battalion as a pathway towards national socialism in Ukraine. And so that's really what they want.
Alex, explain that, because this is one of your latest pieces and it's pretty amazing. The Anti-Defamation League is supposed to care about bigotry in this country. It's really just an anti-Palestinian lobby group historically, right? But they once at least considered the Azov Battalion to be neo-Nazi. You made a complaint, right, about anti-Semitism by the far right in Ukraine to the ADL, and how did they respond to you?
Well, they basically whitewashed the history of the Azov Battalion. It was very strange because my hate incident report, which I filed through their website, didn't really focus on the Azov Battalion much at all. It mentioned it in passing, but that was the only thing that they responded to me about. And they sent me a 2-paragraph defense of the Azov Battalion, basically characterizing them as reformed. The term that they used was no longer the far right group it once was. But if you go back to just April or March, I forget which month exactly, they were calling it the quote paramilitary group with explicit ties to neo-Nazis. That was their phrasing just months ago, 6 months ago, 7 months ago. So now, and I think really the turning point for the Azov Battalion was Mariupol, because they became so integral to the war against Russia, being the front line in that city in the south of Donbass, where again is like why they've been so important for the past 8 years. But now with that being, the site of a actual conventional war, and them having de facto control over it, they had to be whitewashed. And so you had this flood of articles from all these outlets, many funded by the United States government, even Bellingcat in particular, that have attacked Azov for the past 8 years now, rolling back all of their criticism, saying things like, oh, well, it's separate from the political project of its founder, Andrei Beletsky, who vowed to lead the white races against the Semite-led Untermenschen. Explicit Nazi stuff.
That's right here. That's
right. That's the gray zone. Yeah.
The Untermensch zone.
So
well, let's
go ahead.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, they after Mariupol, they started being referred to as defenders in Western media, and then they went on this great tour across the U.S. that saw them even at Stanford University, hanging out with Michael McFaul, or McPhail as we call him over here. They sent delegates to Israel recently. They have been portrayed as the heroes of this war. And this is something that the Azov Battalion recently did. They unveiled their new logo, but it shows what they really are and always have been. This is an incredible video of them honoring their fallen brothers in Mariupol by burning a Viking longboat. This is great production value.
I don't see any extremism.
No, this is totally normal. No fascist salutes. This is what has become of Vikingism. That was a pro-democracy salute.
Yeah. But I think we've been ready for this because of the reporting that the two of you in particular have done on the so-called moderate rebels of Syria. So we knew that a point would come where the mainstream media, which once pilloried Azov, would turn around and try to cast them as modern day freedom fighters. But what? Just to really quick round off the ADL piece, I took a bunch of recent interviews with members, foreign volunteers with the Azov Battalion that spoke to the continued neo-Nazi presence, and I just think that was important to show. I mean, I don't know if you could potentially pull up a picture of Boneface, but we're talking about a group that if it's not 50% neo-Nazi, it's close to it, and I think what we've heard from the left, the talking point that we've heard from the left about neo-Nazis for the past years has been, if there's a neo-Nazi at your party and nobody is denouncing the neo-Nazi, then you're at a neo-Nazi party.
Yeah.
But they don't
here's
apply
the
that.
neo-Nazi Boneface that you mentioned, and the ADL doesn't really see fit to denounce him. He looks like a nice pro-democracy activist to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what the face tattoos tell us. And what I think one clip that I put out very early in February, I think it was like February 26th, I put it out, is a speech given by a guy who's named Yevhen Kadas. He's the leader of C-14. This is a neo-Nazi gang that they're on the front lines now too. You can go to his YouTube channel. RT is banned from YouTube, but you can go to Yevhen Kadas's YouTube channel and watch his war videos and frontline speeches. But he talks about the Maidan coup, and he says that it may have been a small amount of neo-Nazis who were there. There's arguments whether it's 8%, 9% neo-Nazis, but the thing is that if it weren't for the neo-Nazis, the Maidan would have been a gay parade. And
should we play that?
Yeah, if you like, yeah.
Okay.
I think it's really important.
Yeah, and you went at you snagged this, you translated it, and I think it kind of became part of, at least in alternative media, the provided context for people to understand the role of neo-Nazism and ultranationalism in the mainstream of Ukrainian politics, because here it is from the horse's mouth.
Бо вони хочуть нам блага.
He's got a really high voice.
Тому що ми єдині, хто готові їх виконувати, бо нам весело, нам прикольно убивати і прикольно воювати. І вони думали, давайте вже подивимося, що це буде. Тому виник цей новий альянс, про який зараз говорять там Туреччина, Польща, Британія, Україна. Тут ми тут флагман. Тому що ми затіяли війну, якої не було вже останніх 60 років. Так от, уявіть собі, скільки в нас зброї, скільки в нас ветеранів. А тепер уявіть, зникає Росія, вона розвалюється. Тобто виникає там 5 Росій, там Неда Росії і так далі. На європейському континенті найбільше. Тільки в Британії, там, здається, більше.
They have a lot more now.
Потенціал цих збройних сил, це стане проблемою зразу для всіх, хто зараз там десь там намагається робити хенькі уколи. І оце от є наша радість і наша печаль. Чому, щоб ви розуміли, чому так все важко? Не тому, що ми, українці, 300 років, наша дупа страждала, чому ж нарешті влада до нас не впаде, ми такі хороші, ми хочемо в Європу. Ні, це величезна, потужна держава, і якщо ми тут прийдемо до влади, це буде і радість, і проблеми для всього світу. Тому це величезна амбітна задача. Ми живемо дуже в класний час, і тому перед нами стоїть надзвичайно амбітна, класна ціль. Не просто стати там частинкою європейської сім'ї, яка вже там розвалилася, а це є вже йдеться про те, що нові політичні альянси вже глобального рівня, нові політичні виклики.
Okay, so he's talking about Maidan.
Націоналістичні ідеї. Націоналісти якби були там ключовим фактором значно і на фронті. Зараз дуже багато є спекуляцій. Ну, нациків вже ж було небагато, там, ну, ЛГБТшники, там, посольства кажуть, ну, скільки там було там нациків? Ну, нациків там було там 10% там, ну, запаяних ідейних. Ну, це ж питання в тому, це може так казати лише Йолоб, який не був на війні, не знає, наскільки оцих от 10%, хоча там навіть може даже менше було, тому націоналістів було хай там даже 8%, ну, наскільки це в пропорції ефективності впливу, наскільки це складало просто галопуючи безкінечну підвищення ефективності. Не було б цих 8%, бо ефективність упала б на 90%. То тут не в числі мова. Так само, як на Майдані. Зараз вже почали ліваки, там фонди Бьоля там, і так далі перераховувати. Ну, націоналістів там було, там, да, вони були впливові. Там. Та які впливові? Не було б націоналістів, все би це от пішло би сразу на гей-парад.
So there you have it. I mean, and he's 100% right. They had a disproportionate, outsized influence within the Maidan. And behind him, you can see Stepan Bandera, the spiritual father of the post-Maidan regime in a nice 3-piece suit. Stepan Bandera, codename Nightingale. That was his OSS code name by the forerunner of the CIA. He was brought back in to fight communist influence. So that was a Bandera reading in February of 2022. And, that was such an important clip.
So important. He single-handedly dismantles the argument that you get from supporters of the proxy war that Ukraine doesn't have a neo-Nazi problem. And he also exposes the straw man that we get, that gets targeted at us, that, we get accused of saying that all Ukrainians are Nazis, which is not true. The point is exactly as he articulated. Nazis in numbers are relatively small, especially in politics. But in terms of their influence, because of their muscle and their intimidation tactics, and because of their instrumental role in the 2014 coup that really kicked this whole thing off, they have an outsized role in power. And that's why the right sector has all these different organizations, including paramilitary organizations, that can intimidate the state if it doesn't do what it wants. That's how it exerts itself over Ukraine. And that's why after the 2014 coup in the new government, so many key cabinet positions, especially when it comes to security posts, went to far-right people and even neo-Nazis like this guy, because they played a major role in bringing that government to power.
Yeah. And the speaker of the Ukrainian Rada for many years was Andrei Parubi from the Social National Party. I mean, Victoria Nuland said, let's keep Tianbuk on the outside and give Yats to Attaboy. Tianbuk was the co-founder of the Social National Party, who was one of the big three. And that party was inspired by the National Socialist Party of Germany. I mean, it's just so offensive that this has been mainstreamed. And so 2022 is definitely the year we saw neo-Nazism in Ukraine rebranded and mainstreamed for U.S. liberals. That clip I played of the, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we had NATO tweeting out, soldiers with Sonnenrad patches for International Women's Day. I mean, and so, and then, months later, a guy with a Sonnenrad patch shoots up a black grocery store, so there's been a lot of frustration in the mainstream in Buffalo. Yeah. And there's been all these articles from these disinformation people about how there's no connection, but again, NATO and the Azov Battalion have mainstreamed the Sonnenrad. They've reinvigorated that symbol. So
Alex, were you in Charlottesville documenting what happened?
I was 5 feet from the car attack.
So you would have seen the Sonnenrad symbol that you see on Ukrainian military uniforms carried by the marchers there. Am I right?
Yeah. I mean, and then, you had this assassination attempt. I think it was the vice president of Argentina. The guy has a Sonnenrad tattoo. Jon Stewart's giving awards to a guy with a Sonnenrad tattoo. This is an explicit neo-Nazi symbol.
That was an amazing story. God, speaking of the stories of the year.
I forget. We have a special guest waiting in the green room now. But Alex, definitely stay on. But I want to recognize your story before we bring in our special and final guest. This was such an awesome story, and we'll just very quickly discuss it. But basically, you were telling me about this Warrior Games that was going to take place in Orlando, Florida, and that you were going to watch it because you thought something wild was going to happen. And you came up with a story that basically Jon Stewart gave an award to a neo-Nazi at Disneyland. I mean, it doesn't. Yeah,
on the Pentagon's dime.
And then everybody was citing the story, like Tucker Carlson reported it, but I don't know if anyone named you. So, this is.
No, I didn't get a whole lot of credit.
I mean, if it wasn't for you, that would have never got out there.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because I just kind of I became aware of the Warrior Games. I'd never heard of it before. I was looking at my Google News feed, and I had the Sun UK show up, and it was a headline like "Video Ukrainian Delegation Arrives at 2022 Warrior Games." So I'm watching the video. Of course, there's nothing really too interesting about it, but there's a bunch of Ukrainian veterans coming to the United States. Let's see who they are. Let's look into their backgrounds. And so I started doing that, and at least two of them, a lot of them, they had no real online profile that would have been very easy to identify, but two of them did. And both of the two who you could find material about on the internet were involved with neo-Nazi groups, Right Sector and the Azov Battalion.
Well, here's Igor Halushka, and you can see on his left elbow, he's wearing a Sonnenrad black sun. But then, if you look at him getting his award from Jon Stewart right here at the Warrior Games sponsored by the Pentagon, you can see, if you just look closely, he's wearing a sleeve over his left arm to cover up this neo-Nazi tattoo. I mean, it looks like he has some injury or something, but no.
Well, and it's I think if you go back, could you go back up to the cover photo?
Yeah.
Because I spent a week watching these competitions, and it's just like a lot of veterans from different countries, many far more handicapped than others, competing in these games. But I had a feeling that Igor was going to do something, because he had recently, I think earlier this year, participated in the Invictus Games, which is like the UK's version of the Warrior Games. And he had ripped out an Azov Battalion flag. So I figured, okay, I'm going to watch as much of the Warrior Games as I can. I spent a week watching it in anticipation of him doing something like that. And he did. I mean, when he got his gold medal for indoor rowing, he wore his Azov shirt. So that,
yeah, I mean, he's wearing the Azov shirt with the gold medal. He's not hiding that.
Right. And that photograph was published by the Defense Department's visual distribution service. It's called DVIDs. It's a great resource for military photos, military related photos. Journalists use it all the time. So I believe that, there are probably a good number of journalists who saw that and just didn't think anything of it or didn't care to report it. And then,
yeah.
Again, he was honored as the heart of his team and for his personal example by Jon Stewart. So the heart of the Ukrainian team is the neo-Nazi guy.
Yeah. Then
what does that tell you? Right.
Well, yeah. And Jon Stewart went on to softball Condi Rice and Hillary Clinton on Libya. I mean, that was just the most revealing interview ever.
Tough year for Jon Stewart.
Yeah.
And tough year for fans. I mean, I'm a longtime fan of Jon Stewart, even though I know he's had his moments of liberal myopia, but that was just like, oh my God, that was, I mean, to have both these incidents happen were just, is there no liberal who can't be co-opted? Is there no, I mean, I guess I answered the question. It's just, that was sad.
It's funny.
Anya Parampil, is there no liberal who can't be co-opted?
I think that's part of what makes a liberal. They're already co-opted.
Welcome, Anya Parampil, to the Grayzone end of year stream. How are you doing?
Great.
Since I last saw you an hour ago.
I've just been listening to the stream. It's been really great and reminds me why I feel so lucky to work with everyone on the team. I should note one person that didn't get to join the stream today, but has also contributed a lot to the Grayzone over this past year is Oscar Leon. He's not only our editor, puts together any videos that you see Aaron or I publish, but he has been doing some great reporting of his own from Ecuador, as well as now more recently, he's been covering Peru and launched his show Voices of Resistance. So I just wanted to throw that out there as well.
Yeah, we've been doing in recent weeks lots of South American coverage from Ecuador, Peru. We're going to be doing something on Argentina and the campaign against Christina Kirchner, and Oscar's holding it down. There's a playlist now at our YouTube channel where you can get all of this content. And in a lot of alternative U.S. media, if you get Latin American coverage, you're often seeing a lot of the same pundits who speak English, and a lot of them are expats. And I'm not knocking what they do, but Oscar is able to bring people in. He went into the Amazon to bring people from Ecuador, voices from Ecuador, who are rising up against the billionaire president Guillermo Lasso. So that's a new element we're bringing in at the Grayzone. We're also trying to make these streams a little more professional. That's still a work in progress.
And regular too.
And regular. We're going to be,
coming.
doing it more on schedule. It's
going
coming.
to happen, everybody. Yeah.
And also want to recognize Chris Weaver, someone probably no one knows, but he's ramped up our Instagram channel. So if you're not following us on Instagram, it's really popping right now. It looks great. Chris does our weekly newsletter. So if you're subscribed to our newsletter, that's Chris Weaver's handiwork. And if you're not, you're definitely missing out, because you get all the content you might have missed on the site. Anya, you've been covering Venezuela pretty heavily for a few years, and you and Aaron, but you before Aaron, have a book coming out about Venezuela. Why don't you tell us a little about that?
Well, that's why viewers at the Grayzone may have noticed that I took a step back from the camera this year. I had more of a behind the scenes role on the site, editing and helping out there. But most of my focus this year was finishing a book, compiling all of my experiences and reporting covering the failed Venezuela coup, the Trump era Venezuela coup policy, and some history leading up to what precipitated that, what led to this that disastrous policy decision in 2019. And it's already done. And now I just am doing citations and incorporating a few edits, but it should be ready for publication in May. And people can pre-order it there. You can see on Amazon or directly from my publisher, OR Books, which is also publishing Aaron's book on Russiagate.
Aaron, what's up with that book?
I'm close to finishing it. I don't think we'll get it out in. Well, actually, I have no idea when it'll come out, but it will come out this year. And I really appreciate the patience of the audience that watches and supports Pushback, because I have not been able to do it as frequently as I try to finish this book. And basically, the book is, just drawing on all the reporting I've done about Russiagate and how it helped bring us the Ukraine war. And I'm very excited to be releasing it in the same year and with the same publisher as Anya. And it's like the fact that we're both doing books this year, I think speaks to the impact of the Grayzone on these vital issues. And so I'm very excited to be getting out to the world as soon as it's ready.
And also grateful for the whole team, the rest of the crew at the Grayzone for carrying extra weight while Aaron and I were both not as present in front of the camera lens as people are expected.
Absolutely.
Well, these are, these are books that hit on two of the major regime. Well, one is the major regime change plot with a figure who kind of is like a mixture of Zelensky, Barack Obama, and something completely like some complete non-entity loser. That's Juan Guaido. And there's been room for this book, like kind of a left or anti-imperialist history and critique of the coup that was waged has been waged against Venezuela. I guess the Trump administration really put the coup on overdrive, but it's a multi-year project and it's still continuing with sanctions under Biden. I guess this Biden State Department still recognizes Guaido, but no one I haven't seen anyone really put out the book, the authoritative book on this. And Anya, your book is not just kind of an analysis or a history. It contains a lot of inside the room reporting, field reporting. It has you reporting from inside the Venezuela, or recounting your experience inside the Venezuelan embassy, where you were there with Alex. Alex, feel free to weigh in. You were basically surrounded by this right-wing Venezuelan thug squad. It was like Night of the Living Gusanos every night.
Yeah,
Well,
Alex has mentioned a couple times, particularly in that chapter, and it brought back. It was therapeutic for me to go through writing it, particularly that part, because it was so personal. I think I'm gonna have to cut quite a bit of it down because it was much longer than some of the other chapters, but that is definitely a part of this book. Is people are very familiar, or maybe were a couple of years ago when it was the hot issue with my reporting on Venezuela. But what I'm doing now is giving a more holistic narrative, tying all of my whether it was attacks on Ricardo Hausman and the fact that my reporting forced him to step down from the Guaido administration, or my exposure of Carlos Vecchio as a tool for Exxon. And then the title of the book is Corporate Coup, because I'm basically explaining that while perhaps maybe the goal of regime change in Caracas was always way out of reach, and maybe even some of the people behind this policy, even in the Venezuelan opposition, understood that. And while the policy has failed, there was a corporate coup, a looting of Venezuela's assets that is unprecedented, whether it's what happened in the Bank of England or what happened with Citgo, what is happening with Citgo here in the United States. And so I argue that the coup did succeed because U.S. capital, international transatlantic capital and industry benefited from this policy, even if it didn't affect change on the ground in Caracas. So that is pretty much my argument. And while I'm telling that story, I include a lot of personal elements as well, because I was very close to the Venezuela issue, but I do incorporate reporting on the region as well. Bolivia, in my analysis of the OAS, I talk about Honduras, another place that Alex has traveled to. He was there at the same time as us in 2019. And just giving kind of a regional context and global as well, because I talk about how Venezuela is part of an emerging multipolar world. It's going to have a much more of a presence on the international stage as this, and I think this is the year, 2022 was the year that the old transatlantic order died as a result of the Ukraine war and the historic West's response to the crisis. We're sanctioning ourselves at this point, and it's with the way that we're behaving towards Russia, and that policy is a direct reflection of how we've dealt with Venezuela. It would be so easy tomorrow for U.S. government officials to sit down with their counterparts in Caracas and Moscow and negotiate peace. I think on the Russian side, that's what they want, and then on the Venezuelan side, we could negotiate business deals. We could have a very beneficial relationship between our country and the largest the country with the largest oil supply in the world. But instead, we just have this zero-sum mentality where unless we can control every aspect of a foreign government, we're not willing to work with them. And now, I think going forward, we're going to see that was a deathly mistake for the people who are commandeering this empire. I don't think it can survive. We've never lived in a world where Venezuela, Russia, China, Turkey, Iran, all of these countries are working together in order to oppose the financial system based in the United States and Europe. And that is a major theme in my book. So it relates very much to even what Aaron writes about as well.
Well, Aaron, before you weigh in, the chat is exploding about Andrew Tate being arrested for doxing Greta Thunberg. Is that real?
That is not why he was arrested. He was apparently
I was joking, but yeah,
on child trafficking charges in Romania. But at least what people online are saying, it was Greta Thunberg doxed him.
No,
accidentally, because he responded to her in a video that gave up his location. But maybe Alex, you know something that I don't.
No, I was raising my hand to comment on your book on Venezuela and how important it is, even all these years later, what happened at the embassy, because the mainstream media is still lying about it. Just a few days ago, The Atlantic ran an article by one of its associate editors. Did you see this, Anya?
Yes.
Wherein she claimed, quote, because the article is about why she can't go home to Venezuela for Christmas. So she says, quote, because Trump supported Guaido, a vengeful Maduro closed all of Venezuela's diplomatic buildings in the United States. Is that what any of us saw?
No, it's absolutely incredible that even it could make such, and you should note that on Twitter, or someone should, because that shouldn't even make it past an editor. That's just not factually correct. Even if you want to be propagandistic and say whatever, you can't go home because of the dictator, at least beyond rhetoric, you should be accurate if you're going to make a claim such as that. And that is, again, you're exactly right, why it is important to keep talking about what happened at the embassy, because to this day, Venezuelans in the United States cannot receive consular services. They cannot go home and visit their families. And that was our government's choice. And in fact, at the beginning of this month, the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution denouncing they were saying a trend of attacks on diplomats and diplomatic missions, and just reasserting that there is international law we are supposed to respect and acknowledge the sanctity in some ways of diplomatic missions. And that directly relates to what happened in 2019 when the US government completely violated the Vienna Diplomatic Convention, which says that embassy property is inviolable. Authorities from the hosting state, meaning the United States, are not allowed to, without question, enter the premises of a diplomatic compound without the permission of the government. And that's what happened. And in May of 2019, U.S. authorities raided the Venezuelan embassy, hauled out the 4 remaining Embassy Protection Collective activists who were inside the building protecting that space on behalf of the Venezuelan government. And since then, I mean, last I checked, that building is pretty much closed. There's cardboard up in the windows of Venezuela's embassy in Washington, D.C., and no one is working inside. And that is a disservice to the Venezuelans living here, who many of them oppose the government, but would at least like to go home.
Hey, Anya, remember, I think it was the first anniversary or the second anniversary of the embassy. We were planning to do some kind of commemoration at the embassy, and then the U.S. went ahead and assassinated Qasem Soleimani, and there were demonstrations against.
It was actually Palestine. It was Palestine solidarity. Israel was
bombarding the Gaza Strip.
No. Yes, and so we had to delay our Venezuela action, and
so we had this made though. It's a Juan Guaido pinata. And it was custom made.
Sometimes people go in our basement and are like, "Why do you have a pinata of Barack Obama?"
Well,
I am Vladimir Zelensky. I am Juan Guaido. Give me more than 45 million, as Franklin Delano Roosevelt said.
He does look like Zelensky. But
I can't do a Guaido voice, but I just thought I would do Zelensky.
You can at least do his cadence. It's maybe a little bit hard, but
yeah, it goes like this.
But Anya,
he also got a standing O in Congress.
I think Aaron's trying to.
But Anya, I want to ask: hasn't there been a vote now by the opposition, like the Guaido faction of the opposition, to dissolve their fake government?
Yes, well, the opposite. As always, there are so many layers to the Venezuelan opposition, which I tried to capture in my article or in my book. But there was a recent article at the AP explaining because there is I call them, there's not necessarily in the book, but I consider there's a wing of the opposition that is like naturally not just opposed to the government. Like in any democracy, there would be an opposition, but they're at least nationalistic patriots who oppose sanctions against their country, and they're not controlled by the United States. They're the organic opposition in Venezuela. And then there is this faction, the G4 faction, that it is, and Guaido's Popular Will Party is a part of this group. And now there's tension within the pro-Guaido faction due to the fact, I think, because presidential elections are on the horizon. In 2024, there will be a presidential vote in Venezuela. And so now I think the opposition is starting to strategize. What can we do? What are we actually going to, how are we going to deal with reality going forward? And when we have this fake president that we put up at this point, we all know this project isn't going anywhere. Are we going to deny ourselves the right to participate in the 2024 campaign? And this is a constant tension within the opposition, where the pro-Guaido faction calls for boycotts and says that the opposition should not participate in the elections because they're not free. But then this other side of the opposition that's not controlled by the United States says, wait, I could keep my seat in Congress. I could keep my governorship by running and participating. Why should I be held hostage by these loons in this? And everybody knows that they're the U.S. controlled wing of the opposition. And now I think they're experiencing that breakdown within the US controlled bloc as well, because at the end of the day, if these people, I don't think Carlos Vecchio in Miami or Washington, D.C. is concerned about the future of the Venezuelan opposition. He was never going to be elected to lead them if he were in Venezuela anyway. But some of those people, if they're going to be in Venezuela, have to see a future for themselves, and tacking their legacy to Guaido just means that they're forever paralyzed politically. They can't move.
So the Guaido piñata has been politically battered, and a bunch of just hot air fell out, and some leftover stacks of rotted cash. But Aaron, I know you have to go, and we want to wrap up soon. Are there any parting thoughts you want to?
Well, let me just thank everybody. Let me just thank everybody who supports the Grayzone. We really appreciate you having our back. It's not easy to be always the voice of dissent on these huge topics of coups in Venezuela and a proxy war in Ukraine, but it helps us to have the backing of so many people. So I just want to express my gratitude to everybody who supports the Grayzone and sticks with us, and my gratitude to all you guys too. It's great to work with you, and I'm looking forward to another year of in 2023. So happy New Year, everybody. And,
I think Aaron would agree that the top story of the year was MSNBC's scoop yesterday that Paul Manafort made an agreement with Putin to
get Trump
change
elected.
The outcome of the 2020 election for Trump.
I missed that one. Wow.
Biggest story. Breaking. I sent you the tweet. It says breaking.
They got him. They finally got him.
Exactly.
Just in time to the end of the year.
Hold on. I have the tweet here if you want to.
Because it's just so excited. And it's like it was just thrown into the abyss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it speaks to, look, that's a good thing to think about in terms of the moment we're in now. Like during Russiagate, all of us who dissented, all of us who felt alone, all of us who felt as if, this whole narrative of the president being a Russian asset was not just stupid, but also dangerous. It was difficult, but at least at that time, the consequences were mostly, not entirely, but mostly domestic. It was just an all-consuming thing that took up everyone's energy. And yes, there was all sorts of horrible spillover impacts, but now we're seeing the real consequence, which is this horrible war in Ukraine that is very much the result of the Russiagate climate, which, among many consequences, criminalized diplomacy with Russia and incentivized Trump to be hawkish toward Russia and empowered the neocons he appointed to his cabinet to be hawkish toward Russia by ramping up arms to Ukraine, by tearing up arms control treaties with Russia, and then de-incentivized the media from focusing on those issues because they were too busy focusing on Trump being a Russian asset. And those of us in the wilderness calling all this out from the beginning, everybody in the stream included, and I'm sure everybody who's watching us right now, were warning at the time that this was very dangerous. And now we're living in a moment where we're having a consequence. And that same feeling of feeling alone, I think, is one many people have felt in this pro-proxy war climate, where the trend among liberals
war
and war.
Just war.
Yeah. But at least now, though, we're seeing the consequence, and it has woken many people up, I think. And if we can see a silver lining in such, a horrible tragedy, it's that the more people are waking up, and I'm happy to be a part of the efforts to bring out the facts to people. And I'm so grateful for what the Grayzone does. So happy New Year, guys.
It scoops.
Thank you, Aaron. It's been a real honor working with you, and under lots of pressure, you kept your cool. So have a happy New Year, and we'll see you in 2023.
Sounds good. All right. Bye, guys.
Bye, Aaron.
Peace. All right. It's just the triple-headed Hydra right now. So
it's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Definitely since we were actually all hanging out, that's for sure.
You two were inside the embassy. I was on the outside. Spent 48 hours in jail. So I'm glad to see that story will come out in your book next year, Anya, the full story of it. Maybe there'll even be a documentary on the Grayzone about that. I mean, I think that the embassy action was the greatest anti-imperialist protest action of my lifetime.
Yeah, and probably one of the last, considering where all of the groups involved with that, other than Code Pink. And well, Kevin Zeese was a major loss, of course. Popular resistance is still continuing thanks to Margaret Flowers carrying on his legacy. Rest in peace, Kevin. But he was a huge force that cannot be replaced. Code Pink is still out there, but I'll just say that the other groups involved are pretty much that were involved have kind of descended into irrelevance and are a joke now. So it's pretty sad. They should be out protesting the war.
Well, I wanted to actually highlight that before we went, because this might have been my favorite or my most satisfying story to publish this year at the Grayzone, and it was by Christian Parenti, great political economist and social critic. And it's how the organized left got COVID wrong, learned to love lockdowns, and lost its mind, an autopsy. And it's just a devastating piece published this March as the COVID narrative began to collapse and mainstream media started recognizing that closing schools for over a year had destroyed an entire generation of vulnerable youth, that the lockdowns were not only ineffective, that they destroyed businesses, drove people to suicide, opioid addiction, record numbers of car crashes, homicides, just completely ravaged society. And we saw the failure of the experimental injections start to make themselves clear as the laptop class in the lockdown left started all getting Omicron. And then they would all have their mandatory tweet, oh, well, I was glad I got vaccinated.
I'm glad I got vaccinated because then COVID would have been so much worse, but I'm in so much pain now.
Yeah, exactly. Like my left leg is falling off, but I'm so glad I got
no way to prove that. Like everybody who made that statement, they just made it. I mean, I had COVID and I'm not vaccinated. And I'll tell you, a lot of my friends who were vaccinated had way worse experiences than I did. So you have no way of knowing what's true when you say that. You've lost your right to say what would have happened if you had COVID. It's just ridiculous.
Well, the point is that, a lot of the organizations that we've seen around the anti-war movement got really involved in the Branch Covidian cult.
Yeah,
started demonizing everyone, attacking their friends, castigating other people in the anti-war movement just because they didn't want to get the mRNA injection.
No, and they didn't want to oppose lockdowns. What it really boiled down to is that there was a segment of the left that decided they were renting their brain out to the Chinese government. I mean, that's the truth. And now we've seen the lines are clearly drawn. There are people that are
now they're attacking the Chinese government.
I haven't seen that.
Well, are they attacking the
Chinese
government?
I've seen the World Socialist Worker call the Chinese government
who are they?
Basically accusing them of adopting the Great Barrington Declaration and that they're killing their people.
Well, they are.
Eugenics.
Just a little too late.
Well, in any case, with the COVID era really saw a neutralization of the anti-war movement, more fissures, more factions, and the leadership of the lockdown left adopted a narrative that essentially was an assault on workers. And that's what Christian's piece illustrates, as well as the support for mass surveillance that came with digital vaccine passports and, and the mandates themselves.
Convenient. It's so much more convenient that I can do this. Wow.
Yeah.
It's so much more convenient that the airlines can have all my biometric data and medical information.
Yeah. So Alex, I know you,
I'm itching to say something.
Yeah. I know you didn't go along with the Branch Covidian cult, but how did you think this impacted the left and your own position within the left to actually go against the narrative?
Well, I'd like to say really quickly that there were some signs that this was coming before COVID. And I'm speaking about the summer of 2020 when there were the Black Lives Matter protests, which I got my start in journalism in 2014, covering Black Lives Matter.
We were
at
both
that
working
point
together at RT.
Well, even prior to
before,
then, even prior to then, but Black Lives Matter wasn't entirely different. In that time, it was new, it was young, it had yet to be co-opted. And then what really drove it home for me was the rhetoric from some of these groups around January 6th, to see self-proclaimed communists calling for charges of criminal sedition charges against protesters.
Then what are we going to do to commies?
Yeah, that was particularly illuminating for me. And then, of course, they didn't, treat the Canadian truckers much better. Today, I mean, it's just totally pathetic what's happening. Where are the people that were protesting the Iraq war? Where are the people that have been podcasting about Afghanistan for 10 years? The same kind of destruction, I wouldn't say the same kind of destruction as Iraq, but, the same money laundering, at least the same enrichment, the same washing machine of cycling, our taxpayer dollars towards death to go back into the pockets of very wealthy people in the Washington area. The people that have been focusing on these issues and leading on these issues for so long are nowhere to be seen. They are too busy, quite frankly, trying to recruit young women from going to Georgetown University on issues like abortion rights.
Yep.
There was so much more action this year from groups I traditionally associated with the anti-war movement on social issues in the US, like really that are like divisive wedge issues, than on the war, than on the proxy war. And like, then you just felt
when
this.
You already have an entire network of the Democratic Party and so much money on that issue. I don't really think we can contribute anything to the abortion rights campaign.
Well, it's a marketing scheme for themselves. It's one thing I got attacked really badly for was when there were the truckers, and I was saying these communists will go with signs advertising their brand to any liberal protest, March for Our Lives. You got some women with pussy hats, they'll be there. But the people who rent trucks to drive them for a living, and
I mean bourgeois owner.
Bourgeois owner operators.
Yeah.
People who deliver your food and help you eat. I mean, how disgusting.
Right. These people have gone too far. They're shutting down. They're shutting things down, and that can't be allowed. We need to go back to the status quo, and they're Nazis.
And so you actually saw a quote unquote people's blockade of lockdown leftists in Ottawa go out and try to like counter the truckers. And it was like, some of the people I even knew from the Canadian anti-war movement, and they were going and they were literally going out as Trudeau's foot soldiers, as the foot soldiers of this lab experiment concocted in Davos. That's what became of the little anti-war movement that already existed up there. And it was all because they were fighting fascism. It's not the same fascism to throw people out of their jobs because they won't take an experimental injection that doesn't prevent transmission or a viral infection and can actually injure you. That's not fascism. It's not fascism to prevent people from leaving the country because they won't take it, because that's what Trudeau did to Canadians. It's not fascism to prevent people from taking trains and airplanes and public transportation because they won't take an injection. No, that's not fascism. Fascism is guys with big beards and trucks going out, is like parking in public and honking their horns. That's fascism, and that's what we have to fight. And everything they said about all this like foreign right-wing money turned out to be completely fake. Like the Truckers Commission showed that none of that was happening.
Oh, and what about the blocking of payments and the theft of and the freezing of bank accounts of working people and other people trying to support their cause, the government coming in and controlling something like GoFundMe? How is that not something that should outrage every single one of us?
Well, it set the stage for the freezing of Mint Press's PayPal account. Wyatt Reed, our friend, has his PayPal and his Venmo accounts completely blocked. He doesn't even know why. So they're freezing everyone's accounts. They're sanctioning us inside our own countries because we don't agree with their policies on COVID or on their wars, and it's going to expand. And you saw a large sector of the left run interference for Chrystia Freeland and Justin Trudeau, And what did they gain out of it?
Yeah, I would just add that we saw the same in the United States with January 6th, when people were holding rallies for the people that were arrested there, calling them political prisoners and such, demanding a speedy trial, that kind of thing. Antifa was there.
Constitutionally mandated rights.
Antifa showed up and basically, tried to contain them, doing the job of the Capitol Police for them. So I think what we've seen is that we've known for a while now that large segments of the left are willing to act as narrative enforcers for the State Department. What we're seeing now is that, the so-called militant left is willing to act as ground enforcers for the police department.
And the World Economic Forum. They're like the shock troops of the Great Reset.
I'm not rolling my eyes, by the way. There's a stink bug that's really bothering
me.
And
this isn't happening in any countries besides like the United States and Canada.
Well, it's happening in Europe
to a degree. It is, but
not actually.
Resisted more.
Our friend Rami was in Leipzig, Germany, for a lot of the anti-NATO protests, where there have been ferocious anti-NATO protests, especially in parts of the former East Germany, where people, saw that once NATO started going east, they also started losing their pensions and just getting their public assets raided. It didn't work out too well for them. So anyway, they're ferociously protesting the Ukraine proxy war. And who comes out to confront them in the streets, to curse them, to try to fight them, to physically attack them? It's Germany's Antifa forces. So it's not just limited to Canada and the US, where these forces are acting as sort of the shock troops of empire and the biosecurity state.
Well, I think 2022 is a chapter closed on certain aspects of the movement that I've always seen myself a part of. I don't think I've changed at all, but I'm also not that sad about it, because I do see a future. I do see that there is, as Aaron said too, especially now that we are facing a crisis on the scale of this war and we're feeling the effects at home, average people are waking up. So I don't care about your little group or your little club. If you guys just want to keep talking to each other and wearing all the same shirts or whatever you do, you can do that, but the rest of the world is moving on, and that gives me hope.
Yeah. And, critical thinkers aren't tailing the Democratic Party like you are. And people are like, who are you talking about? We're talking about like all of those groups that wear the same color shirt, because they're all pretty much the same. And there isn't a whole lot of critical thinking.
And they'll be talking about this for a lot longer.
Well, they talk trash about me all the time.
It's not worth naming them
because
nobody really watches their content or sees what they're doing anyway. So
anyway, this was therapeutic. I was glad we could get this off our chest. But for the most part,
where's the whiskey?
Yeah, we didn't even have Lafroy and Buffalo Trace for this little ranting seminar. But Alex, I don't know if there's any parting words you want to leave us with.
No, I just want to say Happy New Year to the Grayzone audience. 2023 is when we start to roll back the COVID agenda and the war agenda. It's an honor to be contributing to the Grayzone in this new year. I'm greatly looking forward to Anya and Aaron's books and the reporting that I know I'll be reading from the website, which I struggle to think of any competitor for us, because no, really. I mean, I can't.
Well, there's some other great publications out
funny.
there.
No, I mean, there are some other great sites out there.
There are some wonderful publications.
We do have some very
Mid-Press, Consortium
but
News.
I struggle to think of another outlet that has come close in breaking apart the narratives that we're being fed about this war, that are, promoting this war. And it's just an honor to be a part of a team that carries on the anti-war tradition.
We didn't even get to talk about NAFO, did we?
No, we did talk about it. But Alex, thanks for being a part of it, and we're looking forward to more from you in the new year. I've got some new Rubenstein pieces in the pipeline, and Anya as well. I know you're working on a long form investigation as well as your book. So
yeah, stay tuned for that. that should be fun. Probably not something people would expect from me, but it's coming.
Well, I think it'll help illuminate a lot of what's going on in our domestic political sphere. And yeah, I have a number of projects in the tank. So I just want to repeat everyone's thanks to our audience. We really couldn't do this without you. You're our secret Russian funder. I actually don't even know if any of you are Russian, but whatever. We're funded by our readers. We're supported by our readers, and we love connecting with you through these live streams, through our public email account, grayzoneproject@gmail.com, through our Patreon messages, through our Twitter DMs, however you want to reach us. I love hearing from you, and I wish all of you a happy new year and a much better 2023 than this past year. Hopefully this will be a year where we'll see an end to this war. And yeah, so
I'm not hopeful considering the billions of dollars that's being spent now for weapons that we won't even see for another couple of months, if not years. But I want to be hopeful.
Well, we were among the first to, really break apart how they're scheming for a long war here. However this looks in the future, I'm sure we'll be on top of it.
And absolutely. I will listen to anyone work with anyone who wants to fight that and just call. If your goal is peace, then I just think that's some place that we should all start, and we can resolve our other differences later.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's to a peaceful new year, and thanks everyone for being a part of the Gray Zone. We're out.
Peace.